LeBron James is full of it. And in this particular instance, as it pertains to his son, he is a liar.
He leads the NBA in turnovers per game. The Lakers are one of the worst transition defenses in the league, so that impacts that aspect of it because they're not good at that.
The air in the studio grew tense the moment Stephen A. Smith leaned forward and made the accusation that LeBron James appeared to shift blame onto Luka Dončić after a disastrous collapse against the Orlando Magic. And this was not casual criticism but a serious charge that touched leadership, accountability, and legacy. Because for over 2 decades LeBron has operated not only as a superstar athlete but also as someone who understands media narratives, public perception, and how to respond to criticism. Yet when a figure like Stephen A. publicly suggests deflection after a loss, the conversation escapes television and spreads across social media, locker rooms, fan bases, and even front offices, turning a single post-game comment into a broader debate about leadership under pressure, and when the game itself is examined. The context becomes important because the Los Angeles Lakers were in a tight contest that should have been controlled by a veteran team led by an all-time great, but the final minutes fell apart with sloppy possessions, missed defensive rotations, and an offense that stalled at the worst possible time, allowing the Magic to close stronger while the Lakers left the floor without answers. And after the game LeBron made comments about a late possession involving Luka's earlier decision, which some interpreted as explanation while others interpreted as redirecting responsibility. And Stephen A. framed it as a classic public relations pivot where a leader distances himself from the failure instead of absorbing the blame, which struck a nerve because fans often expect superstars to own bad nights publicly, not reinterpret them, and critics argue this is not an isolated incident but part of a long pattern where LeBron has carefully managed narratives about injuries, effort, team chemistry, or expectations in ways that shape public perception before criticism fully forms, which has been one of his greatest strengths but also opens him to the criticism that optics sometimes appear prioritized over accountability, and this becomes dangerous for a team because leadership perception affects locker room culture, trust, and team identity. Since a leader is expected to absorb pressure and criticism so teammates can focus on playing, and when players feel blame may be redirected publicly, it can slowly fracture trust even if unintentionally. And Stephen A.'s argument therefore moved beyond one loss and into organizational culture, leadership responsibility, and the example set for younger players across the league, because young stars often mistake media messaging for leadership when in reality leadership is proven in film sessions, locker rooms, and crunch time execution rather than post-game interviews. And Stephen A.'s concern was that if the league's most influential player appears to redirect blame publicly, younger players may learn the wrong lesson about accountability and responsibility, which could damage team cultures that rely on trust and ownership. And this situation also sits within a broader generational shift in the NBA where younger stars are emerging and taking control of the league's biggest moments, meaning every leadership moment from veteran superstars is analyzed as part of the transition from one era to the next. And when an older superstar appears to deflect responsibility while younger stars are expected to deliver in clutch moments, narratives shift quickly and sometimes ruthlessly. Yet LeBron's defenders counter with his longevity, championships, playoff performances, clutch shots, and decades of leadership, arguing that he has earned the benefit of the doubt and that media figures sometimes amplify controversy for ratings and debate cycles. And both perspectives can exist at the same time because LeBron's career includes both extraordinary leadership moments and moments where public comments created controversy. And beyond basketball, the situation also affects business, branding, sponsorships, and franchise perception because LeBron is not just a player but a global brand whose leadership image affects team value and league image, meaning how he responds to criticism, how he supports teammates publicly, and how he handles losses all carry financial and cultural implications beyond the court. And ultimately the debate returns to a timeless sports question about greatness. Whether greatness is defined only by statistics, longevity, and achievements or also by accountability, leadership presence, and how a player responds in moments of failure. And Stephen A.'s position is that if someone wants to be considered the greatest of all time, they must stand in front of losses, take responsibility, and accept criticism without redirecting blame, while LeBron supporters argue that a career spanning decades of leadership, winning, and reinvention already proves his leadership. And the real conclusion is not a simple answer but an ongoing debate where every game, every quote, and every playoff moment adds another chapter, and how LeBron responds not to media debates but to performances on the court and leadership within the team will ultimately determine whether this controversy becomes just another media storyline or a defining chapter in the story of his legacy. The conversation took a more personal turn when a moment surfaced where someone suggested that LeBron James may have tried to damage another person's career, a claim that was not fully explained publicly but was hinted to be validated after comments made on the Pat McAfee show, and this added another layer to the broader discussion because it reinforced the idea that in professional sports blame, truth, perception, and narrative are rarely identical, as statistics and game film tell only part of the story while locker room dynamics, leadership decisions, and public comments tell another, and in that particular game LeBron's stat line still looked like what people expect from a veteran superstar who influences the game, fills the stat sheet, and keeps his team competitive. But basketball is a rhythm sport and rhythm often collapses in the final minutes where missed defensive rotations, hesitation, and poor execution cannot be explained away by a single quote or post-game explanation, which was exactly the point being emphasized by Stephen A. Smith, who argued that truly great players do not rely on post-game explanations but on late-game execution when the clock is low and pressure is highest. And he did not argue that LeBron was finished as a player but instead that the standard must be higher for someone still placed in the greatest of all-time conversation. And that higher standard includes taking responsibility publicly and privately after difficult losses. Because one of the biggest mistakes young players make is confusing media messaging with leadership, believing that a strong quote equals toughness or resilience when in reality resilience is built in film sessions, locker rooms, and late-game performance rather than interviews. And this is why Stephen A. pushed this angle so strongly because younger players across the league watch how superstars behave when things go wrong. And if the most influential player of the last 20 years appears to redirect blame or control the narrative instead of owning mistakes, younger players may learn to avoid responsibility, manage perception, and deflect criticism, which can damage accountability culture inside teams and hurt championship ambitions. And this entire situation also sits within a larger generational shift happening in the NBA, where new stars like Luka Dončić and Nikola Jokic are becoming the league's new leaders and defining moments through performance rather than explanation. So, when criticism suggested LeBron pointed toward a younger player after a loss, it was interpreted by some not just as criticism of one game but as part of the transition from one era to another where leadership expectations are changing. And of course LeBron supporters push back by pointing to his championships, longevity, clutch performances, playoff runs, and decades of leadership and reinvention, arguing that media personalities sometimes amplify controversial interpretations to fuel debate cycles and ratings, and the truth likely sits somewhere in the middle where LeBron's career leadership record is undeniable but individual moments can still be criticized. And beyond the court, this type of narrative also affects business decisions because LeBron is not just an athlete but a global brand and cultural figure whose leadership image influences sponsors, franchise value, league marketing, and public perception, meaning how he responds to criticism, whether he publicly supports teammates, and how he handles losses can have ripple effects far beyond one game, which is why Stephen A.'s criticism was framed not just as sports commentary but as a broader leadership debate, ultimately bringing the discussion back to the central question that always appears in debates about greatness, whether greatness is defined purely by numbers, longevity, and achievements or also by accountability, leadership presence, and how a player responds when things go wrong, and rather than offering a simple conclusion, the situation forces fans to choose their perspective, either agreeing that leaders must publicly own failures without redirecting blame or defending LeBron's long career of leadership and success as evidence that isolated moments should not define his legacy. And in the end, this debate will not be decided by television arguments or social media discussions but by performances, leadership decisions, and how LeBron responds on the court and within his team, because those responses will determine whether this controversy becomes just another temporary storyline or a meaningful chapter in the long and complicated story of his legacy.